All right, so where we left off is we got some breakdowns in here and a little bit more character with things like eye darts, and we're ready to explore some curve refinement. When you're doing animation curve refinement, what you are going to have to pay attention to is the hierarchy. So when we blocked in our animation, we talked about how the hierarchy is important, but when you refine it, you also want to refine based on the hierarchy. So what that means is you're going to do the top first, and you're going to work your way down. Now, this is going to be varying from character to character. On our particular character, this is going to be the body. Following this is going to be the shoulder. After that, the elbow, down to the wrist, and then to the fingers. Notice the head can be on its own because the head is a separate branch of the body, which is kind of nice. But this is the order we're going to want to do this in. This is going to differ for every character you work on. Most humans have a pretty standard character setup, and we'll explore this later on when we create a humanoid. But generally, the center control here, known as the root, is the first area of refinement. And then from there, it branches in two directions to the torso, which would be second, to the neck, which could be the third, and to the head, which would be the fourth. And then coming downwards, you have the legs. The legs are their own branch, and they actually tend to use a different setup called an inverse hierarchy, in which case we can actually just do the feet next. But we'll talk about that later when we get to characters. Now, there's another thing we're going to look at while we're doing the refinement here. The first thing is just that the curves look good and they don't have anything weird going on. The second thing is we're going to look for opportunities for moving holds. Moving holds are where you take your holds and you give a little bit more motion to them. But let's go ahead and start with the curves, since we may have some interesting ones with the rotations we have set up. So I'm going to give a bit more screen real estate here to my graph editor. We're going to select the character, and we're going to start with the torso. And I'll start by looking at the translate X. And we can come in here and look for any weird areas here. You can highlight frames and hit F to just frame up on these. And just look for any areas that look super twisted or convoluted. And we can adjust those. And I'm just going to click through these to kind of see if there are any areas like that. You can see in this area, we have several small transitions. This is also a great opportunity to delete things. So if you feel like these aren't really doing anything, you could clear those out. If you do feel like they are, you could delete any that aren't really contributing. And you could adjust the handles of the ones that are to be a bit smoother so you get nicer motion. So you can see there on that Y, I'm going to just get a nicer motion there. So you get that to look good. And then we can kind of continue forward. Looking at Translate Z, remember with Translate Z, we actually want this to move linearly. So I'm going to switch this to be a linear tangent. Now I might want to highlight everything first and then make it linear. You'll notice this will make it so there's no ease out when the character is first arriving, or no ease in when it stops. And we can get that set up. Now, we may want to have an ease out when it stops in every action moving forward here in the in-between stages. With things like walks and progresses forward, you want to keep it linear because the energy is already there. But since this character is coming to a stop and in a stopped position till it leaves, we can highlight these midsections here and set those to auto tangent. So what that will do is at the beginning, we'll have a constant rate. As the character comes to a stop, he'll ease into that stop, and then we'll look. So we might have to do some manual in-between keyframing here if we want to get this to look exactly the way we want. Because I don't want it coming to a stop right away. I want it coming to a stop later. So let's set this to linear in front. We have our ease here, but I don't want the ease to really stop till we're looking at it at this frame. So what that would mean is basically taking this Z, moving it downward along a linear trajectory, and then having an ease out. So I'm just using middle mouse button to move that downward so that we have that kind of easing out a bit. If we hit play now, we're searching, still linear, and then we stop, stare, and we proceed to do our animation. And then we have our movement off screen, which I'm going to switch back to linear. And that's going to be the torso movement. Now, I can look through these and see if there's any other areas that need refinement, but I think those are all okay. The torso is actually pretty straightforward. This is going to be the rotate X's for the torso. And none of these look too wild, so I think we're safe to assume these will be okay. Rotate Ys. There's a little bit of a weird one here. We might be able to just delete that, and you'll see it didn't do anything. That's just going to clean up the curve transitions, because you'll notice even though deleting it here didn't do anything, if I come to the frame before and delete it, it does a little bit there. So you'll see it just cleans up that motion. And then we'll look at the rotate Z, and we can do the same thing on rotate Z here. So that's going to be an initial cleanup there for the body curves. It's just going to get rid of some of the weirdness and make the initial movements read well. So now we can move into the next area, which is going to be the shoulder. We're going to want to select one of our shoulders here. I'll start with my main camera shoulder, and we'll just go through the rotational axes. You can see how limiting this to just the information that the animator needs to see saves a lot of time. They don't need to come in here and check any nonsensical translates that aren't going to do anything. They can just get to what matters. So looking at the rotate X's, none of these look super out of the ordinary. Rotate Y, this one here, this midsection, looks like we could just delete that and maybe adjust that to be a little bit cleaner. We could also analyze that area and see if we need to make use of that. And sometimes the frame forward button here, one frame at a time, is a good tool to use. I think here we kind of pop out of frame quite a bit. If I delete this, it goes out a bit more, but it feels more natural. So that's going to be one of those things that probably compounds over the entirety of the arm. And I'm okay with it because it's a quick motion, but we might want to keep this on screen for that frame if possible, which brings up an interesting point that we could even consider moving this in just a bit to ensure that never goes off screen. So I'm keeping that keyframe, but now I'm making this animation curve much more dramatic. But if I do that, it never really comes out and it goes over the head, which I don't really like. But that is something I could play around with. And you can see at this point, I'm retiming that keyframe to give me that effect. We could also, instead of retiming, change the magnitude, which is actually usually the better idea. So the motion still plays at the same rate, but now with that magnitude changed, it never goes off screen because it never has the chance to swing out there. So I think that looks okay. Coming into the rotate Z, we have a lot of that going on here. We could decide if this is needed. This area I'm going to highlight and hit F to frame up on. And to get a nicer curve, I could move this downward. I could just tweak this out a bit, and then that gives us just a cleaner looking curve there. So we can move up and over in our grab motion and swoop and pick this up. We're overshooting here though, which is kind of interesting. We need to decide where that's occurring, because here we're in the right section, but here we're in the wrong section. So we could decide if it's controlled by this or a different channel in terms of the arm setup there. And it's hard to say. It's kind of interesting. If we delayed this back and actually delete that, we're still on the wrong side of that. Now, this might be one of those areas where we decide we need to intervene with an in-between, because I'm not exactly sure why we're swinging into the ground or past the object. And the answer is we're probably not doing either, but what I might do is at this frame, just lift this a little bit and move this over so this is what we see. Now, this is going to give us some weird looking curves for this particular control in that area because it is a in-between, but it will correct that one particular pose. And we might want to think about it in the sweeping out pose here as well. Here we have this really dramatic swoosh up and over. It might be better if we change this pose entirely to where it's not swooshing up and over and it's just swooshing out. And I could just hit the S key there as well to adjust that and see how that reads. And we're still going off screen, which is unfortunate. It's something we're wanting to avoid. I might delete this again here and find a nice in-between area that's a little bit more in between. Consider hitting the S key. And seeing how that looks. So something like that looks okay. All right, cool. Now, you'll see we have a little bit of a different look here. We have this sort of stepped look, and that's going to be something we are kind of looking for. We also have this issue here where the hand's going into the ground, but I think I'm going to leave that up to the elbow. And we can continue the refinement down the arm, but let's go ahead and finish the shoulder here, and then we'll get to cleaning up those areas first. So let's first start by getting a nice smooth look to this, and then worry about the rest later. So I'm going to come back into here. Take a look at this. The smoothness between this rotate X and that rotate X isn't great. So I could maybe consider deleting these out, seeing if that makes a big difference. And it actually does a pretty good job. I just got to frame forward here and make sure we're not going into the dirt at any point. Rotate Y looks okay. Rotate Z, same deal where I very likely can delete some of these things unless they are critical to the pose. You'll see we can kind of clean a lot of this up on the rotate Z. I like this little doodle here. This is a nice ease in. I might just tilt that a little bit more that way, and that will give me a smoother look to that grab. So we can play this just to check, but that should smooth things out a little bit and then start correcting some of those small things that I'm looking for. Now, it still is a little bit jarring to the eye, but you have to remember we're refining iteratively, and the arm is just not one unit, it is multiple. So what I'll explore next is going to be the elbow, and moving into the elbow, we can go into the rotate X's, and you'll see here we have some fun stuff going on with the rotate X's. We have this nice ease in, ease up, and then as we come down here, we have this pretty crazy arc. What I could do is delete this, just kind of toggle the edges in between, and get a smoother transition so it's not quite as jarring. And we can just check this, and I'm just moving through one frame at a time where possible. And that looks pretty good. Coming to this next pose, I'll just adjust this handle to be smoother, and we can leave that be. For rotate Y, this looks okay. We don't have anything too wild here. We do have a big jump here between this frame here and this frame here in terms of the rotate Ys. We could delete this to see what that does, and it's rotating forward, so that's kind of a big deal. That's the snatch grab there. That's going to be needed, so I think we can leave that be. Rotate Z, we can come in here and just delete that to clean it up, and this one here, we can probably delete this one as well to clean it. You'll see there's a bit of an arc here, and you'll see how it's not a nice lump, so we might add in a little bit more of a linear line there, just to give us a smoother transition between here and here. Now, we also need to check something, because you'll notice it is going into the ground in this shot. One of these points it was beforehand. Here, we can see if this is what's controlling that, and it kind of is. So this is where things do get a bit tricky. It's like, okay, well there it kind of needed that tangent, and it's we have to ask here, does it need this? And that's rotation to make it look at it. So I would say yes, we kind of do need that transition. We can see how this looks here, grabbing, and we're just going to go frame by frame. You can see that twist there. We might need to angle this down or up a bit more and get that to be as perfect as possible. This is where a broken tangent might be necessary. I'm going to take this and break it here. And on this side, I need this to just be adjusted slightly so that it's not going into the ground. And on this back side here, I need it to be adjusted down slightly so it's not, or I guess up slightly so it's actually lifting. So you'll see I'm using a broken tangent there to give an ease in, ease out to that. I could also insert keyframes to help me with that, but I think that's going to be the approach I choose to take. On this one, I can just delete that for smoother animation. And we can see what this looks like with the elbow refinement applied to that arm. That's looking a little bit better. I could analyze this area too here, just to make sure that coming out here, we don't have anything crazy. I think a lot of this is actually in the shoulder in this area rather than the elbow. And I think where I actually might want this to be is actually in the elbow and just having the elbow out more at this frame. And I think that's really all it needs to do to read better. So I think I am going to give that as an elbow frame there. And I think that should do the trick there. And I'm just going to frame through it one frame at a time here, just to make sure the sequence is looking the way I want it to look. Arms moving every which way there, so I may have to come in and do some additional adjustments. But we'll just do our initial pass here, and then we'll take a look at how we can do some further adjustments. Let's come to the wrist next. Just look for anything that looks really out of the ordinary on this one. One of these areas that looks a bit weird is this segment here. It has this sort of double lump here, but I think that's our grab. And what we're seeing is an anticipation, but that looks okay. We could maybe smooth this out a little bit here in terms of this, and we can see how this affects things downstream. Since it's a wrist, I don't think it affects things too much, but just get that to be a bit smoother in that area. Rotate Z, come in here. We can look for this one. And this is one of those areas where maybe just a little bit of smoothness would help. And that looks okay. So we can move down to the fingers and make sure there's nothing crazy going on with the fingers here. Start with the base first, and we only have one axis to check there. There's not a lot of movements in these, so that's fine. On this one, I'm just going to delete this in between and very likely delete this in between. And the other side will likely follow the same sort of pattern. Interestingly enough, the top one can probably be deleted on this one here. Let me check that on the other one really quick. No, it looks like it's inverse. And then this one here, same deal. I'm just going to delete the in-betweens for a smoother animation. Okay, cool. So that's going to give us just kind of a base overview to that arm. Our curves are a bit smoother, but I want to see the motion. I feel like we need to see the motion to really get a good read on this. So let's save our progress because we made some. And before we start working on the other arm, I'm going to grab the wrist of this one, grab the wrist controller here and do a visualize create editable motion trail. And I'm choosing the wrist because it's going to show me the biggest arc of the arm there in terms of motions. And we can check this for the various areas it's going through in terms of animation. So for example, when I look at it here, you'll see how it's going up in a straight line. That's okay because our character is just kind of coming up. There we have sort of a mini arc. But you'll see this is the area I don't like, how it's kind of swooping there. So what I would like to see with this is I'd like the arc to come out and do something like that, potentially for the arm, or at least the hand. So right around this middle point here, which is probably around this keyframe or earlier, I'll want to look at how I could do that. What would be the best way to do it? I think a lot of the adjustments I've made have kind of stopped this from happening. And this is over a very short period of time, but this frame it's going in. So I think at this frame, we could explore making it go out, and then we could come in and look at the refinement of the curves. Now, our best candidate for this is probably the elbow, just from the sheer fact that it's attached to this. So we could move that and hit the S key. Then we could move this down a little bit and do the same thing. We could just move it out and hit the S key, and then we could move it down. And you'll see at this point, what I'm doing is I am really getting in here and starting to do in-between animation on my own. And I've corrected the curve there so that it's giving me more of that arc I'm looking for in that sort of period of time. And we can hit play. And it's not the most glamorous thing in the world, but sometimes it is required to make it look correct. Sometimes you just have too few keyframes there, too big of a motion to get it exactly where you need it to be. I also don't like how this is kind of going up and over and down right here. It kind of has this interesting sort of kink. What I might prefer is at this frame for it to already be down in, potentially. That's going to be a hard one. So we have those nice curves there. We're swooping down and up, and then down and in. I'm actually not opposed to that. It's not exactly the pattern I would choose at the end of the day. But it's so fast, I don't know if I notice it. Now, the nice thing is my throw looks really great there, so I don't really have an issue with that in the least. And I think that looks okay for what I'm aiming for. So I think we can call that reasonably okay. The jump between here and there is also pretty dramatic. This is kind of a weird trick, but what we could do is we could do a keyframe on the fingers here where we essentially delay these backwards a little bit and have them follow the motion prior. And if I go ahead and set a keyframe on these, this is a pretty dramatic jump for these guys. But what that will do is it will make those trail, and it will make that read better on the grab. So we're doing a little bit of exaggeration in there and just kind of doing a smudge so that in that very fast motion, there's some negative space between here and there in terms of the arm movement. It's a wild idea, but it works out pretty well. With that said, let's analyze the curves a bit more on these. Save, because when you're working with these motion trails, it is prone to crashing. Make sure you save another iteration, because a lot of the times with animation, when we're doing it in the method we're doing right now, it's pretty unforgivable to undos. I'm going to look at the elbow, and we'll just take a look at the various frames I have transitioning here, and the sharpness of them, and whether or not the leading frames would help at all. So that's my various rotations. I could delete those out to get those back, but I'm kind of forcing that to hold into place our arm there correctly. So I think that's fine. I could look at deleting this frame. And the rotation doesn't really affect the motion trail so much here. So I'm actually okay with that on the rotate X here. I might delete this and just leave that as is, because I think that looks okay leading up to this on the rotate X. There is quite a bit of movement here to here, which I'm not the biggest fan of. We could close the fingers a bit more right here. They are pretty wide, so it could be a matter of coming into this rotate Z and actually pulling it down at this point. So you just keep that in a bit more during this pose. And I'd have to do it both. Let's actually check this. It might be up I need to do for this. No, it's definitely down. I think this pose may be part of the issue, but we can play around with that there. And, you know, at this point, we're just really fine-tuning and tweaking these. I accidentally moved my camera there. I'm going to undo a bit here, getting back to this elbow adjustment I did on the rotate X. And maybe check the other rotations really quick. So we have this dramatic rotate Y here. We have all these various crazy rotations going here. We have to ask ourselves, are these necessary? Or is that going to be enough to give me the transition I'm looking for there? It gives me a bit of it, and then the rotate Z we can look at the same way. And it does look like all of these are moving progressively in the right direction. I deleted the rotate Z's I added in there, and it could be not necessarily the addition that is the problem, but it could be what we already had. So let's just see how that's looking there. So that's giving us a bit of a better arc now. And that's having deleted most of these things I've added. We do have some weird rotation here, but I think this is mainly going to be chalked up to the wrist. So let's explore that in terms of the arm and elbow movement. That looks good. The wrist movement is what's looking a little bit weird there in terms of the silhouette. So what I would like here is to kind of maintain the pose that I have at this frame. We could look at the rotates here, and we can see that between there and there, we have these two keys. It might just be that we drop these two keys to get something that looks a bit more natural through here. And the first thing I like to check is deleting. I know it's a little bit weird, but a lot of the times what I find is taking away is better than adding with animation, just from the sheer fact that it gives you a more natural movement generally. We could also just kind of manually author this keyframe if we clear out the various frames that are there. And that often is easier than trying to adjust what's already there, especially if you have some that are working and some that aren't. So, for example, there, you can see that one little transition. It gives us something a lot nicer looking than what we had originally. Now, this is a little bit weird. There's this pretty wild twist right here going on with the wrist. That's the one we just added. This is where we're getting to. So this is going to be something I need to kind of analyze and figure out, okay, what's going on here? Is this weird twist at this point being caused by the wrist, or is it being caused by the arm between this frame and this frame here? So those are going to be some of the various things you might run into. Now, troubleshooting this is interesting. You usually want to start with what you feel is the easiest. In this case, I feel like the wrist is easier than the arm, because the arm has a lot more that it impacts. We could also look at the wireframe sometimes and with a character like this get a better read, but I don't think we're really getting that too much here. We could also just manually fix it. So basically here, assuming it's the wrist, what I could do is I could copy this pose, all of these, Control C, and then at the next frame, paste it. And you'll see it's not the wrist, it's going to be the elbow upstream. So that is an interesting factor. We did all this work in this elbow, and now we're noticing that between here and here, we're having a pretty dramatic shift in the hand. So it might be a matter of rotating it to be correct, or even copying the keyframe on the arm to make it correct. Because there to there is pretty dramatic. So in experimentation, once again, if this pose is correct, and this pose here is correct-ish, then theoretically everything between here and there may be able to be removed. But that's not the case. We just need to find which axis is the offender of this twist between this frame and this frame. So I highly doubt it's this one. If we look at these look, oh, well, I stand corrected. This very well may be the offender. So we could delete that. Let me turn this off here. And it is rotating outward, so we could check if rotate Y is contributing. And it is very possible that rotate Y is contributing. It's making a big jump between these points. And that may be just the issue we're seeing. So let's see. That's going to be the up and down movement. Actually gives me a better arc there, so I might move that up more. But I don't think it's the one responsible for flipping that. Yeah, it's definitely not. So that means it could be rotate Z that's responsible for causing that really weird flip. And there's a good chance it is. But we do need that rotate Z to make it look correct. And you'll see deleting on the rotate Z there is going to make the hand a bit more correct, where it has this smoother transition, which is what I'm looking for. But in this area, it goes chaotic again. So we could explore the rotate Y values, and it might be that the rotate Y needs to be adjusted now to compensate for that adjustment on Z. And I may just have to adjust the fingers here, because that's actually giving me a pretty smooth motion, all things considered. We do have this drop here, which might mean deleting that might be better, or this drop, which seems to be happening here to here, might be the result of the shoulder. So I'm thinking about where that drop is. That's interesting, because that drop is not being affected too much by my elbow here. But I would say that corrects the elbow to be non-problematic. So now that drop must be upstream in the arm here. So, and I think we can see the culprit, which is this keyframe here, potentially across these. And sometimes when you're trying to fix things, you end up breaking them. So there can be a lot of back and forth here. I'm getting that arc to look good now. And then we're swooping down and we're grabbing, but we have this issue where we are now underground. So how do we get that above ground? We can rotate this on the x-axis, it looks like. And this is the whole arm this time. Okay. I think I done messed up now. All right, we're going to undo a couple times there. You got to be very careful when you're going through and doing these things. You don't want to screw up the big overarching keyframes if you can avoid it. And that's looking okay. I might go with that. We do have this frame here where it mysteriously is kind of divoting down under the ground, though, between one frame and another. That's usually a side-by-side keyframe. It could be a timing issue, too. So if I were to grab something like the shoulder and the elbow together, we could see if there's an issue there and identify it, because it may just be a matter of needing to move one of the elbows over to match. So I'm not seeing an immediate keyframe before this. It could also just be a tangent issue. It does look like that Y does a big effect there, but it looks wrong without it. So this is also one of those things where it's such a small animation problem. It might just be better to fix it manually here. So I could use the elbow here to fix it. Kind of just moving this into place and pressing S. And that looks good. So that kind of force corrects the curve issue. From here, I also have a bit of a wrist issue. The wrist is fine there, and the swoop here, we're kind of going underground. So I could force the wrist here to look right and do some animations to correct it. So what's happening here now is we're going to swoop out and have the wrist come into place, maybe level here a bit more, and then come in and grab that. Now, something to be aware of, whenever you're doing grabs like this between characters, a lot of the times it does require in-betweening to get something that looks a bit smoother. And I think finally at this stage, I'm starting to get something that I enjoy the look of. I'm being a little bit nitpicky here, but that's looking okay. Now, I also don't really like how this is going off screen here in terms of the finger, but what's nice is the fingers are a little bit easier to fix than anything else, and we can very likely bring these in so they're on screen. And you'll see I'm just bringing that top finger in, moving it upwards. And because this jump is so extreme here, we're probably not going to notice that transitioning. So something to think about is when you have frames really close together, you quite often can cheat it a little bit. And the motion blur is going to clean up that area anyway. And there we go. So I'd say at this point, I'm fairly satisfied with that arm, and I can move on with my life with those adjustments. So let's go ahead and save. And as a challenge, what I want you to do is try refining your body and your arm up to the stage where you have a decent set of animation curves where the motion trail looks good. And then as a challenge of your own, I want you to refine the other arm. So go ahead and give that a shot. And when you're done with it, come back and we'll go ahead and finish up the other arm together. So go ahead and pause, take a moment to do the refinement, and then come back and we'll do the other arm together. Okay, so let's go ahead and try out the other arm. I'm going to take the motion trail on this one, and I'll actually delete it. I think we're good. I'm not going to refine that any. Actually, we might come back to it, but we can always apply a new one. But on the other arm, I'll do a visualize, create editable motion trail, and we'll just go ahead and check the motion on that before I get to any refinement. And just make sure none of the arcs seem really out there. We're getting nice smooth arcs everywhere. That looks fine to me. Cool. So none of those arcs are really far off. And we can just check through the various channels. So we can take a look at rotate X. We could come in here, and at an area like this, you can see we have a lot of this interesting stuff going on. What I might do with this one is just move it down a little bit here just to give it a bit more of an arc. So that way we have a smoother transition. I might also consider just deleting it if I don't feel it's necessary, and maybe adjusting this curve and this curve. Just have a little bit more volume. That might look nice. Then we can come into the rotate Ys. This area seems to be in the same ballpark here. I could push this up a little bit on the rotate Y here, just to get a smoother transition and a little bit more volume, a little bit more reason for this to be going on. And then the rotates, we can look for the same thing, maybe zoom in on this, and that rotate doesn't really look necessary, so we can get rid of that. So that should be fine for the shoulder. We'll move down to the elbow here. So in the elbow, we have a bit more action, especially going on in this area. I don't really have an issue with any of these. We might just clean up some of the tangents here. Rotate Ys, same deal, no real issue. Clean up the tangents. And rotate Z's. Now, why is this arm so easy? It's not grabbing anything. So remember, I mentioned when you have grabbing interactions, usually you have a lot of refinement, a lot of in-betweens to do. But when you just have an arm dangling off to the side, there's really not too much to do besides just come in here and ask yourself, does keeping this keyframe look good? Does deleting this keyframe look good? Going from there. Here I do have a little bit of a waviness between here and here, and I do have to ask myself, what is this doing at this frame? Is this actually contributing in a substantial way? So I can hit delete, and you'll see it's not. So this might be one of those situations where deleting these, maybe even all the way across here on this wrist, just gives a smoother result from point A to point B, and I think in that case it does. That might not be the case for all of the rotates. So for example, the rotate Y here looks like it has a clear purpose. If I were to delete this keyframe, I'd say that we do lose a bit of the silhouette. But these ones on the side, we can get rid of those just to clean up. This area here, once again, seems to be one of the big offenders of this pose. I think that's fine, and I think that's fine there. Okay, so I think that gets rid of most of the strange curves for that particular hand. It gives us some nice motion. And I think at this point, we can consider the curves fairly cleaned up. This is just the first pass of curve cleanup, all right? A lot of it was spent fixing the other arms motion, getting it to just have a cleaner set of animation arcs in terms of the grab, and also staying on screen, which is a bit of a challenge. That's kind of on our framing, but a lot of the times in this industry, you do animate to a set camera. Other things that I didn't really consider is just small things like this throw pose here. The hand does go off screen for a frame. This can be fixed with the translate Y of this particular pose here, just sinking it down a little bit further than it is currently. I do need to make sure that the character doesn't get stuck in the ground, but small things like that, we could come in here and adjust as we notice them. And there we go. Now at this pose, when it throws, you'll see the finger never leaves the screen, just the object, and it's looking pretty good. Okay. So at this point, I think I can save and call this good for the first pass of the animation curves. Once again, just adjusting those motion trails and cleaning things up. So as a final challenge for this part, what I want you to do is clean up your other arm's curves, check its motion trails, and then we're going to explore the idea of moving holds next.